So far, we've seen how ballet went from being a very stylized, formal group activity to the very beautiful melodies, some often folk story kinds of tales of Tchaikovsky's ballet. Now we're into the modern period. What's happening in ballet? Ballet is still very much alive and, in fact, changing all the time. I saw a ballet not long ago where they had taken Bessie Smith tunes and they were doing ballet to it, and it was amazingly wonderful. So when we get to the 20th century, we've already talked about how the music is different, keeps changing. One of the composers who did some very dramatic things with ballet in terms of the music and the dance was Igor Stravinsky. So Stravinsky was a composer at the turn of the century, Russian, who worked with a very significant person in the history of ballet, and that is Sergei Diaghilev. Diaghilev was an entrepreneur, basically. He was not a musician, he was not a dancer, he really didn't have any of those skills, but he loved all of those things, and he was a great salesman. So he knew how to get together the people that he needed to create a production, to be able to finance it, to get people to come to it. He was the mastermind behind all those things, and he was responsible for a remarkable number of significant ballet events over the time period that he worked. So he worked with Stravinsky on several of his ballets. Something's really important about Diaghilev to know is that he was also interacting with famous painters and visual artists of the day. He hired Picasso to create costumes for ballet. Picasso, I mean, it's not like Picasso wasn't already famous. So he's hiring people who are famous artists to create designs for costumes. Just imagine the power of that, being able to do that. I'm going to give you a link to a website. The Victoria and Albert Museum in London did a wonderful exhibit of Diaghilev and his relationship with those artists, and it has pictures of the costumes that he had people design. He had them designing sets for him. So he had found the very best people he could to create those works. And so you should take a look at that just to see the really cool stuff that they came up with, especially since it's also early 20th century, and costuming-wise, it's pretty out there in terms of what you might think of for ballet as well. So Diaghilev works with Stravinsky. Stravinsky, like Tchaikovsky, is famous for 3 ballets. One is called The Firebird, which is a Russian mythology about, sort of the phoenix coming out of the ashes sort of story. He also did a ballet called Petrushka, where the characters are puppets. So that's kind of an interesting approach to ballet. People didn't think you could make ballet dancers look like puppets, but they managed to make that work. But the one that he's most famous for is The Rite of Spring, or La Sacrée du Printemps. See how to practice my French. This is from 1913. So imagine 1913, you're an audience member, you've been going to the ballet, you've had your season tickets for years, and you're going to the ballet, and here's a new ballet by Stravinsky, and you show up to the ballet. All right. So this ballet is based on a lot of pagan Russian history. So the characters are sort of caveman-like, tribal people. So they're not your pretty swans and those things that we've been looking at in Tchaikovsky all this time. So we go to the ballet, we settle in, we're ready. And when the music starts, it's very weird. It starts with this kind of odd, high-pitched bassoon solo. This is not what we expect when we go to the ballet. What's happening here? Things move on. This is 20th century now, right? Stravinsky's kind of pushing the envelope a little bit. Instead of having all these beautiful, lovely melodies that we associate with the ballet, he's got these intense, driving rhythms like boom, 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 boom. Yeah, ballet? Who's going to ballet dance to that? Just doesn't go with boom, 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 boom. Well, the dance itself was also new. So we've got Stravinsky, who's doing a story that's not your pretty story. He's got music that is very focused on winds and percussion. It's very driving, it's very rhythmic, it's very dissonant. And the dancers are doing things that nobody expected either. We're very fortunate that the Joffrey Ballet has recreated that production. Remember, they've got the choreography. They know what it was. They've got the costumes. So I'd like you to go down and watch the scene from the Rite of Spring. And when you come back, we're going to talk about what audiences thought about it when they saw it. All right, so now you have watched a scene from the Rite of Spring. What'd you think? When I first saw this video, I thought, you could take out that music and you could put a hip-hop track in and it would look just like a hip-hop video. The dancing is just so not what you think when you think ballet. They're hunched over in odd positions and like jump up like straight up off the ground instead of leaping beautifully. It's different. Now, imagine that you're there in 1913 and the audience. What would happen? The audience did not react well at all. In fact, there was a riot. A literal riot at the first production of the Rite of Spring. Fortunately, they persisted and they kept doing this ballet. But you can see that this would have been a very dramatic change from the kinds of things people who were used to seeing Giselle and Coppelia and all those other really sort of pretty operas happening. Ballet, sorry. So Stravinsky, this is his big moment here. The Rite of Spring, highly dramatic. You may recognize some of the music because it's also used in Fantasia. It has nothing to do with the way that the storyline actually goes. But I think it's just wonderful that we have ballet troupes now that are recreating these early things so that we can see what it was like and really get a sense of why that was such a big deal, that the Rite of Spring was so different. So it illustrates a lot of things about 20th century style, musically, and in terms of ballet. Now let's look at another Russian composer, and that is Sergei Prokofiev, who's just a little bit behind Stravinsky in terms of time. Prokofiev is famous for some orchestral things. You know him for Peter and the Wolf, which is the children's piece that introduces us to different instruments. He also wrote ballets. My favorite ballet, like of all ballets in the world, is Prokofiev's Romeo and Juliet. Another one of those great examples where we have a literary influence that is powerful and it just keeps going. We're still doing Romeo and Juliet stories today. So Prokofiev has taken the story of Romeo and Juliet, translated it into ballet. Prokofiev is this is 1935, so we're just a little bit later than Stravinsky. He, like Stravinsky, has a lot of emphasis on rhythm and a lot of emphasis on the winds and percussion part of the orchestra. So while there are certainly lovely string parts in this ballet, it, like the Rite of Spring, is driven in a slightly different way. I'd like you to watch two parts of this ballet. One happens early in the ballet, and it's a scene, basically it's in the town square there, and we have the Montagues and the Capulets and all their knights of their families are out in this open space, and they're basically just sort of strutting their stuff. They really aren't going anywhere, but they're really just sort of showing their power. You may recognize this piece of music because it was actually used in a car commercial several years back. They had a scene like where the car comes driving through this thing, and as the car's driving through, these gigantic steel balls were swinging, like missing the car as it drove through, and they're using the music from this Dance of the Knights from Romeo and Juliet. So take a look at that because it's a really nice example of a crowd scene in ballet and how they would manage that many people on the stage. And then the second scene that I would like you to watch is the balcony scene. You can't do Romeo and Juliet without thinking about the balcony scene. So when we think about that balcony scene, this is like the highlight romantic part of the story. We would think this is going to be really lushly string kind of driven. And it does have some elements of that string part. But think about how Prokofiev uses a slightly more modern sensibility about that, how he creates that sense. One of the things that I love about this scene is that you remember that Romeo and Juliet have barely met. And they start spatially very, very separated. She's on the balcony and he's in the garden, which in the play, that's how it would stay. But obviously, if you're going to get a good ballet, you got to get the two together physically, right? So she eventually comes down. And look at the way that both the music and the dance show that change in their relationship, how they're falling in love and how they're coming together and trusting each other more. I mean, if you think about a partner dance, a pas de deux like this, where you have two people who are dancing together, there's a lot of trust that has to be going on there, because he's going to pick her up and carry her around, and you have to absolutely believe in your partner. And the way that the choreography and the music show you that change in their relationship is just so powerful. I think it's one of the greatest scenes in all of ballet. So watch the crowd scene and then watch the balcony scene, and if you like it a whole lot, I think you can actually watch the entire ballet on YouTube somewhere, and hopefully you'll take advantage of that opportunity and watch what is my absolute favorite ballet, Prokofiev's Romeo and Juliet.